It is the 5th of June, and this day in Baptist history, we're reading from the College Post to the Trading Post. And our scripture reading is John chapter 4, verses 28 through 30 and 39. The woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come, see a man which told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Then they went out of the city and came unto him. And many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him for the saying of the woman which testified, He told me all that I ever did. It would seem incongruous in our day, but at one time in the history of the Baptists in America, a college president resigned his post to ride the Ox Express westward and became a pioneer preacher on the frontier. Franklin College, a Baptist school in Indiana, grew out of a specially called meeting among Indiana Baptists on June 5, 1834, in Indianapolis, Indiana. In 1843, in the infancy of the college, the Reverend George C. Chandler, pastor of the First Baptist Church of Indianapolis, was persuaded to assume the presidency of the young school. President Chandler presided over the college until 1850, when he did that which seemed incompatible with his position of honor by resigning from his post so that he might head west on the Oregon Trail. The Reverend G. Chandler was born to Baptist parents in Chester, Vermont on March 19, 1807. This was not an opulent family, but George prospered from a spiritual background and gave himself to the Lord in his youth. He was converted when he was 18 and baptized into the Springfield Baptist Church. 4 years later, on May 31, 1829, that congregation licensed the young man to preach the gospel. Young Mr. Chandler entered Madison University at Hamilton, New York, to prepare for the ministry. But before graduating with his class in 1835, he left the school to complete his academic training at the Newton Theological Institute, graduating in 1838. His ordination took place on September 5, 1838, and immediately following the ordination service, Chandler was united in marriage with Miss Persis W. Held. The principal at Newton Theological Institution had received a request from several brethren in Terre Haute, Indiana, requesting that a graduate be sent their way to assist in building a Baptist church. Chandler was the answer to their prayers, and though their expenses were not underwritten, the couple traveled by way of stagecoach and canal boat to their challenging field of service. In 1839, Chandler was called as pastor of the First Baptist Church of Indianapolis, and he served in that capacity until he was chosen as president of Franklin College. The Reverend Chandler, former pastor from the Springfield Baptist Church, the Reverend Ezra Fisher, had moved westward to Oregon, and he now urged the youthful college president to resign and join him in conquering the frontier for Christ. To be sure, there was talk of beginning a college in Oregon, though that encouragement proved to be premature. Thus it was that Mr. and Mrs. Chandler joined a group traveling west on what the settlers referred to as the Ox Express. The traveling company would stop on Sundays, and the Reverend Mr. Chandler and the Reverend J.S. Reed would preach along the way. The man of God began preaching in the feeble churches that existed in Oregon, and he built a circuit that reached some 60 miles from his home. He had regular appointments to preach in the Oregon City, French Prairie, Santiam, and Shiloh churches, with occasional appointments at Molalla Prairie and other distant points. At times he walked 15 miles one way to an appointment. In the scope of his ministry, he assisted in erecting buildings in Oregon City, Portland, Salem, Amite, and Eugene, Oregon. Though in a pioneering ministry in 1844, he obtained a master's degree from Columbia College, and in 1855, Franklin College awarded him the Doctor of Divinity degree. Dr. and Mrs. Chandler were well known in Oregon for their sacrificial service. An incident will show his devotion and energy. At one time, one of his ankles was covered with boils, and he could not bear his foot to the floor. Such was the pain. He had an appointment 26 miles distant, and the only way for him to go was on horseback. He took an old, gentle horse, slow and sure-footed, mounted him, got his sore foot on the horn of the saddle, and in this way rode to his church, had to be helped off his horse and into the house, and sat with his foot on the desk before him and preached to his congregation. And this against the protest of his family, and to a church paying him less than $100 a year for once a month preaching. Then it must be remembered that the pastor had to ride home again. In April of 1858, Dr. Chandler was called to take charge of McMinnville College, and he served as its first president. While serving in that capacity, the man of God continued pastoring in area churches with a desire to reach others for Christ. During the 3.5 years that he was president of the newly formed college, the college produced several outstanding men who became pastors, while 3 of the alumni of that period served on the judicial benches in the state of Oregon. The pioneering spirit possessed Dr. and Mrs. Chandler, and we rejoice today in the impact and their vision made upon the Old West. To God be the glory.